When Richard Gilmore opened his eyes, he was enveloped in chaos. Flames licked at the walls around him, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters of doom. The acrid stench of smoke burned his nostrils, and the air was thick and suffocating. In the distance, the desperate cries of a woman and child cut through the crackling roar of the fire. Richard's mind raced as he struggled to comprehend his situation. The last thing he remembered was falling asleep in his apartment after a long day at work. Yet, now, here he was, surrounded by an inferno in a place that was completely unfamiliar. He didn't know how he had ended up here, but the urgency of the moment didn't allow him the luxury of introspection. His instincts kicked in, presenting him with two choices: escape and save himself, or head toward the cries and attempt a rescue. As the flames closed in, Richard chose the latter. Focusing on the sounds, he carefully navigated the chaos. Every step was calculated. The unstable ground threatened to give way at any moment. The fire seemed alive, its heat pressing against his skin like an invisible force trying to push him back. When he finally reached the source of the cries, he found a woman clutching a small child. Her appearance stopped him in his tracks. She wasn't human. The glow of the flames illuminated her features. Her skin had an iridescent quality, shimmering faintly in the shifting light. Her eyes, wide with fear, were unnaturally large and glowed faintly blue. The child in her arms shared her otherworldly features. But there was no time to dwell on the strangeness of the situation. The fire roared, smoke thickened, and their chances of survival dwindled by the second. Richard crouched in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. Despite their differences, her expression was unmistakable. She was desperate, terrified, and clinging to the hope that he could save them. "Follow me," he said firmly, even though he doubted she would understand. He gestured for her to take his hand while carefully lifting the child onto his back. To his surprise, the woman nodded slightly and gripped his hand with strength born of desperation. They moved quickly, but cautiously, Richard shielding them as best he could from falling debris. A sudden explosion sent a shower of sparks and chunks of burning wood raining down around them. Richard threw himself over the woman and child, absorbing the brunt of the impact. He winced as a sharp edge grazed his arm, but pushed the pain aside. Survival was all that mattered. As they neared an exit, they encountered a damaged fire escape. Its metal steps were warped and precarious, but it was their only way out. Richard assessed the situation in seconds. First, he secured the child on a relatively stable platform below, then helped the woman climb down. His body acted as a shield, absorbing the heat and impact of falling debris. Finally, they reached the ground. The moment they stepped outside, cool air washed over them. Richard inhaled deeply, coughing out the smoke that had invaded his lungs. The woman fell to her knees, clutching her child tightly to her chest. Her glowing eyes filled with tears as she turned to Richard, her gratitude unmistakable even though she spoke no words. Richard wanted to collapse, but something about the woman and her child kept him on high alert. Their otherworldly appearance stirred questions in his mind. Who are they? How did they end up here? And how did I end up here? Before he could speak, the woman reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a strange, metallic device. It was small and spherical, pulsing faintly with blue light. As she activated it, a translucent energy field enveloped them, and Richard found himself inside a strange projection. The image revealed scenes that weren't his own, but felt eerily personal. He saw himself lying unconscious in a sterile, alien environment. Strange beings like the woman before him, but clad in uniforms, hovered over him, studying him with devices he couldn't comprehend. As the image faded, the woman spoke. This time, her voice resonated in his mind, bypassing the barriers of language. "We did not mean to bring you here," she said, her tone heavy with sorrow. "Your kind is different. We sought to understand, to learn. But our experiments caused a catastrophe." Richard's chest tightened. "A catastrophe?" he asked, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. She nodded, her expression pained. "This fire, it wasn't supposed to happen. Now we are all that's left, our people, are gone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Richard tried to process the weight of what she was saying. Not only was he in an alien world, but he was also the sole human survivor of a disastrous accident. "Why me?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman hesitated, then spoke again. "You were chosen because of your resilience. We wanted to understand what makes humans strong, what gives them hope even in darkness. But now none of that matters. We are alone." Her child stirred, looking up at Richard with luminous eyes filled with both fear and trust. Richard felt a pang of responsibility. "What happens now?" he asked. The woman looked at him, her gaze steady. "We can stay here and wait for the flames to consume what remains of this world. Or we can leave, together." Richard thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind. It seemed so far away, yet it was still home. He looked at the woman and her child, both now relying on him for survival. "We go back to Earth," he said firmly. "We'll start over, together." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Their journey to Earth was perilous. The woman used her technology to construct a temporary craft, and Richard found himself traveling through the void of space in stunned silence. As they approached Earth, he wondered how they would integrate into a world that wasn't ready for them. They landed in a secluded forest, far from the prying eyes of humanity. Over time, they built a small home, hidden from the world. Richard took on the role of protector and provider, teaching the woman about human life and learning about her alien culture in return. The child grew quickly, showing a blend of human adaptability and alien intelligence. Richard marveled at the child's curiosity and resilience, finding joy in teaching and nurturing a being unlike any he had ever known. Though questions lingered about his abduction and the experiments conducted on him, Richard found peace in his new life. The woman, whose name he learned to pronounce as Kareth, became a steadfast companion. Together they raised the child, forging a bond that transcended the boundaries of species and worlds. As years passed, Richard began to notice subtle changes in himself. His stamina, which had always been average, seemed to have increased significantly. Tasks that once left him exhausted now felt effortless. His reflexes were sharper, his vision keener, and his wounds healed faster than they should have. At first, he dismissed these changes as the result of living a simpler, more active life in the wilderness. But deep down, he knew it was something else, something to do with the experiments Kareth's people had conducted on him. He confided in Kareth one night as they sat by the fire, the child whom they had named Lyra fast asleep in the small home they had built. "I think your people left something in me," he said, his voice low but steady. Kareth's expression shifted, her luminous eyes reflecting both guilt and concern. "It's possible," she admitted. "We were studying your biology, trying to understand the resilience of humans. There might have been unintended effects, but does it trouble you?" Richard shook his head slowly. "Not yet. But I can't help wondering. What if it changes me more? What if I stop being human?" Kareth placed a hand on his, her touch warm and grounding. "You are still Richard. No matter what changes, you are who you choose to be. And to us, you are family." Her words comforted him, but the unease lingered. He resolved to monitor himself closely, keeping the changes to himself for the time being. Lyra grew rapidly, her hybrid nature manifesting in remarkable ways. She had Kareth's iridescent skin and glowing eyes, but also Richard's strong, steady demeanor. Her intelligence was extraordinary, far beyond what Richard had ever encountered in a human child. By the age of 6, she was already devising small contraptions using the remnants of Kareth's alien technology. One day, as Richard returned from a hunting trip, he found Lyra sitting by the stream near their home, a device in her hands emitting a faint hum. Kareth stood nearby, watching with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "What's she working on now?" Richard asked, setting down the fish he had caught. "She's building a communicator," Kareth replied softly. "She says it's to learn more about the stars." Richard's chest tightened. He crouched beside Lyra, studying her work. "Why do you want to know about the stars, kiddo?" he asked gently. Lyra looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with curiosity. "I want to understand where Mama came from." "And where I come from. Don't you ever wonder, Dad?" Richard couldn't falter curiosity. After all, he often found himself staring at the night sky, wondering about the universe and the forces that had brought them together. But he also feared what might happen if their presence on Earth were discovered. "You're smart, Lyra," he said, ruffling her hair. "Just make sure you're careful. Some things are better left alone." Lyra nodded, but Richard could see the determination in her eyes. Years later, when Lyra was nearing her teenage years, the peaceful isolation of their lives was disrupted. One quiet evening, as the family shared dinner, a faint hum filled the air, growing louder until the ground beneath them trembled. Richard was on his feet in an instant. Kareth and Lyra closed behind him as they stepped outside. A craft sleek, silver, and unfamiliar descended into the clearing. Richard instinctively positioned himself in front of Kareth and Lyra, his heart pounding. The craft landed, and a hatch hissed open. Two figures emerged, their appearance similar to Kareth's people but taller, more imposing. Their eyes glowed brighter, and their movements were fluid and deliberate. Kareth stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "Who are you?" One of the figures spoke, their voice resonating in the air like music. "We are the Seekers. We received a signal and ancient distress call. We came to investigate." Richard shot a glance at Lyra, who shifted uncomfortably. It was clear that her attempts to build a communicator had somehow drawn these beings to their location. "We mean no harm," the Seeker continued, their gaze shifting to Richard. "But we are curious. We sense something unique about you." Richard felt the weight of their scrutiny. "I don't know what you're looking for, but this is our home. We don't want any trouble." The second Seeker stepped closer, studying him intently. "You are altered. Your biology has been enhanced. This is rare, fascinating." Kareth moved protectively in front of Richard. "He is my family," she said firmly. "He is under my protection." The first Seeker raised a hand, a gesture of peace. "We respect your claim, Kareth. But know this, the alterations in him are not without consequence. They may lead to complications." "What kind of complications?" Richard demanded. The Seeker hesitated. "That depends on how the changes manifest. You may find yourself connected to forces beyond this world." Before Richard could ask more, the Seekers turned and re-entered their craft. As quickly as they had arrived, they were gone, leaving the family shaken but unharmed. The encounter left Richard with more questions than answers, but it also solidified his resolve. Whatever the future held, he would face it head-on. Lyra's curiosity grew, but she learned to balance it with caution, working with Kareth to refine her understanding of their dual heritage. Together, the three of them created a life that blended the best of both worlds, building a sanctuary where they could thrive. As Richard watched his daughter navigate the challenges of being both human and alien, he found a renewed sense of purpose. The changes within him no longer felt like a burden, but a gift, one that allowed him to protect and nurture the family he had come to love more than anything in the universe. In the quiet moments under the stars, Richard no longer questioned why he had been chosen. Instead, he embraced the path that fate had laid before him, determined to make the most of every moment with Kareth and Lyra. Together, they were more than survivors, they were pioneers of a bond that defied the limits of time, space, and understanding. And in their unity, they found strength, hope, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.